Before Jean Valjean became the man you know from Les Misérables, he was a nameless prisoner, beaten, broken, and forgotten. This is the untold story of how a single act of kindness planted the seed of redemption in a world without mercy. If you love powerful storytelling, timeless characters, and classic literature brought to life, hit the like button and subscribe now for more immersive book stories every week. The wind scraped the earth like a rusted rake, lifting dry snow into the hedgerows and along the furrows of the fields beyond Faverolles. It was a winter that had entered not with trumpet nor storm, but with a silence that grew more terrible with each passing day. Beneath this hush, the peasants of the countryside moved like specters, limbs stiff, breath fogged, voices subdued as though nature herself had decreed silence in place of sustenance. Among them labored a man of some 25 years, tall of frame, dark of brow, with hands that bore the roughness of pruners and the calluses of a dozen trades. He wore the coarse blouse of the poor and shoes so patched it was hard to tell if the leather remembered its origin. His name was Jean Valjean. He had been up before the sun, as was his custom, and now stood at the edge of a narrow field where the trees, long since stripped of leaf and life, jutted up like frozen limbs from the soil. Another man, older and slight, leaned on a staff nearby. "You're cutting too close," the old one said. Valjean did not look up. "The frost has taken the higher branches. These will burn better." "That may be," the man answered. "But the landowner's wife counts the kindling as if it were coins. Mark my words. She'll accuse you of thieving bark from the Lord's own fingers." Valjean gave no reply. His eyes were fixed on the wood in his hand. Each stick no longer wood, but a child's cough, a sister's hunger, a cold night less cruel. He straightened, stretched his aching back, and turned his gaze northward, toward the low hill beyond which lay a modest cottage. There, his sister Jean waited with her 7 children. All fatherless now, their man having succumbed to a fever the previous spring, leaving behind nothing but a rusted hoe and a few debtors who still came sniffing like wolves at the door. Valjean, who had no wife, no child, no education, and no fortune, had made them his own. His heart had not chosen the burden, it had simply bent to it. That day, the firewood he gathered would be bartered for bread. That bread would be broken into 7 pieces. If any remained, it would be wrapped and set aside for the sickliest of the brood, Elise, who had not spoken in 2 days. He gathered the last of the bundle and tied it with rough twine. The older man was watching him. "You work as though death is chasing you." Jean looked at him, his voice quiet. "Not death," he said. "Hunger." The old man snorted. "They're cousins, those two. One enters the mouth. The other closes the eyes." Jean shouldered the bundle. "Then I must keep both from my sister's door." With that, he turned toward the path, boots crunching over frozen mud. The cold sliced through the seams of his coat, but he did not falter. Each step was a decision. Each decision, a small defiance of the world's indifference. As he walked, his thoughts, like ghosts, circled him. What good is labor without bread? The hand that toils is not the hand that eats. And yet, to not toil is to betray them. In that moment, Jean Valjean did not know that the truest chains are not forged of iron, but of duty. He only knew that winter was not ending soon, and that children could not eat promises. The mayor's steward lived in a stone house that squatted at the edge of the village square like a fat spider in its web. Its windows were small and tight-lipped, as if resentful of every ray of sunlight they allowed in. There was no welcome in the place, only order, inventory, and ink. Jean Valjean, with the bundle of firewood still upon his back, paused at the iron gate. His breath came in white puffs. The fog of it curled like smoke before the steward's door, which bore the painted sigil of the commune. A faded sheaf of wheat surrounded by laurels. The emblem mocked him. He knocked. A thin boy answered, in livery too large for his limbs. He looked up at Jean with the vacant gaze of the underfed and overtasked. "Is Monsieur Gautier receiving?" Valjean asked. The boy scratched his head and peered back into the house. "Depends." Jean's voice was quiet, but steady. "Tell him Jean Valjean of Faverolles asks a moment's mercy." The boy vanished. Moments passed. The cold gnawed through the soles of Jean's boots. At last, Gautier appeared. He was a man of account books and narrow smiles, his coat black and clean, his fingers stained with ink. His mouth always looked as though it had just finished saying no. Valjean, he said, stepping into the chill as though to punish it for existing. What is it now? Jean lowered the bundle slowly to the ground. I came to ask if the town has any provisions for the winter weeks ahead. My sister has 7 children. Her husband is dead. The little one, Elise, she coughs in her sleep. I can hear it through the wall. Like something breaking. Gautier folded his arms. You are not on the poor rolls. No, Jean replied. I work. Then work harder. I do. There is no more work to be had. Gautier sniffed. You expect the commune to feed every mouth that trembles when it snows? Faverolles would be bones in a month. Jean's jaw clenched. I ask only for bread, he said. Not charity. Bread. Bread is charity when you don't pay for it. Jean's voice dropped lower, but not softer. I have 7 mouths that trust me. I am all they have. Gautier's brow lifted. That is unfortunate. But unfortunate is not unlawful. Be careful, Valjean. A man in your position must watch the shape of his need. It can begin to look improper. There was a silence then, the kind that fills the throat with something harder than words. Jean bowed his head slightly, neither in thanks nor deference, but simply to keep his fists still. He picked up the bundle again, now heavier for the pride it crushed, and turned back toward the road. As he walked through the village square, he passed a boy no older than 12, crouched beneath the overhang of a closed shop. The boy's hand darted forward and snatched an apple from a cart. Quick, clever, trembling. The merchant's cry followed immediately. Thief! Jean did not stop to think. He stepped sideways, blocking the merchant's path just long enough for the boy to vanish down a side alley. The merchant, red-faced and muttering, gave Jean a shove. Blind oaf! Get out of the way! Jean did not answer. He merely kept walking, bundle dragging against his back, soul dragging deeper still. That boy was wrong, he thought. And yet he ate. The thought struck him like a stone. The cottage was small and low, with walls that sighed in the wind and a roof that bowed beneath the weight of years. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. It was too dear to waste fire when none were awake to feel it. The door creaked as Jean Valjean entered, and the groan of its hinges felt like a confession. Inside, the air was heavy with silence. Not the restful silence of peace, but the exhausted stillness of people too weary to speak. The eldest of the children, Lucien, only 10, sat by the hearth with a broken stick and a slate, tracing shapes not out of study, but from a sort of instinctive hope that learning might unlock some unseen door. The others, 6 in all, from 8-year-old Clemence to 2-year-old Elise, lay upon straw mats and folded cloth, the thinness of their blankets made crueler by the sight of how closely they curled to each other for warmth. His sister, Jean, rose slowly from where she'd been kneeling by the hearth. You're back, she said, her voice hollow. Did they give you anything? Jean set the firewood down and shook his head. No, they said I should work harder. Jean said nothing for a long moment. Her hands twisted in her apron as if trying to wring courage from threadbare linen. I sent Lucien to the grocer yesterday, she murmured. He begged for bruised potatoes. They turned him away. She hesitated, then added, almost shamefully, they laughed. Valjean's brow darkened. He will never go begging again. I know, she said and lowered her gaze. It's just, the little one hasn't eaten since yesterday morning. As if summoned by her name, Elise stirred. A soft whimper escaped her lips. No words, only the sound a wounded bird might make in its sleep. Valjean turned away. He reached into the satchel at his side and drew out a small cloth bundle. Inside were 2 turnips, a crust of hard cheese, and a sprig of dried thyme. The fruit of barter. Not enough, but more than nothing. Jean's eyes lit up, not with joy, but with that flicker of desperate gratitude that knows it will be short-lived. You should eat first, she said quietly. Jean cut a slice of the crust with his knife and handed it to her. "You're the mother." She shook her head. "You're the one who walks 20 miles a day. I only worry." Jean paused, looking down at the sliver of food in his hand. Then he broke it in two. One piece he placed in Jean's palm. The other he held over Elise's lips. The child stirred again, her small mouth opening just enough for a crumb to pass. Her fingers, tiny and cool, brushed against his. He whispered something. Not a word, not a prayer, but a sound low, aching. A father's sigh in a brother's throat. A man should not need to choose who eats. He looked around the room. The children were sleeping, but lightly, the kind of sleep that hunger haunts. Jean sat down beside him. Her eyes were distant. "Do you think God sees us?" Jean did not answer at first. He stared into the hearth, where the embers were black and cold. At last he spoke. "I think he has turned his face away, or else we are too small for his eyes." She nodded slowly, as if the words confirmed what she had long suspected. Outside, the wind howled again. Inside, Jean Valjean sat still, shoulders hunched, jaw set. Not in defiance, but in something quieter and more dangerous. Endurance. That night, the cold grew bolder. It did not knock, it entered. The wind found every chink in the walls, every loosened plank and cracked shutter. Even the coals in the hearth gave up their glow, retreating to ash as if in resignation. Jean lay upon the floorboards, his coat pulled over him, the bundle of firewood already rationed into tomorrow's hope. He did not sleep. His eyes stayed fixed upon the ceiling, as though he might discover some forgotten promise etched in the beams. A child whimpered. Elise again. Jean, across the room, stirred to soothe her, murmuring soft sounds of comfort that had no words, just the rhythm of mothering. Jean sat up slowly. He felt something bitter rise in his throat. Not sickness, not hunger, but helplessness, the kind that curdles into thought. He stood, quietly, outdoors. The frost had formed a silvery skin over the earth, and his boots crunched it beneath them. The moon hung low and yellow in the sky like an eye watching without judgment, without intervention. Jean walked. He did not know where he was going, but his feet found direction where his mind found none. Past the well, past the chapel, past the baker's shuttered windows. And then he stopped. The bakery door, a small one, painted green once, now mostly worn to wood. Beside it, the narrow window. Inside, loaves, round, golden, thick with crust, sat stacked upon the shelf like a procession of miracles. One loaf could feed the children. 2 might last 3 days. The bread is there, he thought, and I have hands. What separates me from it is not the wall. It is the law. He looked around. The street was still. No dogs barked. No steps echoed. The village slept. Only the bread was awake. He stepped to the window. It was low. The shutters were latched, but loosely. His fingers found the hook. He stopped. A voice within him rose. To take it is to become a thief. Another voice, louder. To take it is to become a brother. His hand trembled. He looked at his palm. The same hand that had pruned vines, stacked firewood, carried children, lifted coffins. It was not made for stealing. It was made for service, for dignity. But dignity had not fed Elise. Dignity had not answered when Jean asked if God still looked their way. Jean let his hand fall. Not yet. He turned from the window, and with a heaviness that seemed to thicken the air around him, he walked back through the frost. The hunger had not lessened, but something else had grown within him. A seed, not yet an act, but a question. What becomes of a man when the world makes righteousness impossible? He did not have an answer, but he knew the question would return, and soon it would demand one. The morning came gray and slow, as though it regretted its arrival. Jean Valjean stood again at the treeline, axe in hand, shoulders stiff with more than cold. The soil was iron. The branches cracked like bones underfoot. Yet he worked, but his thoughts were not in the wood. Each stroke of the axe rang like an echo of the night before. The image of the bread behind the windowpane, Elise's trembling lips, Jean's hollow voice, the whisper of frost on the bakery shutters. Around noon, snow began to fall, soft and dry, as if the sky had decided to bury everything gently. The wind no longer bit. It whispered, "You waited too long," he muttered aloud, as if accusing the snow itself. The other workers had gone early. None had been paid. There was no more coin in Faverolles than compassion. Jean Valjean stood alone in the white-draped silence, staring into the trees, and something inside him, something tightly wound over weeks and months, suddenly snapped. Not with fury, but with decision. He dropped the axe. He did not go home. He went into the village. This time he did not stop at the bakery window. He did not hesitate at the shutter. The door was barred from within, but the side window he knew was loose. A pane had been cracked for months. He had mended it once in better days, when the baker's boy had dropped a coal bucket and broken it. No one had thanked him. That had not mattered then. He reached the window. The shop was dark inside, but the shelf, yes, the loaves were there. Thick, unmarked, unsold, unsliced. He drew his scarf up over his face. Then came the sound of breaking glass. Quiet, almost polite, like a cough in church. His hand reached through. The edges caught his sleeve. Blood smeared on the wood. He took a loaf. Not the largest. Only one. A simple brown loaf, round, warm from the evening baking. He withdrew his hand. He turned, and found himself eye to eye with a child. A girl, perhaps 9, in a red bonnet and patched skirt. Her mittened hands held a small pail of milk. She stared at him with enormous, questioning eyes. Jean froze. She said nothing. He did not run. He looked at the loaf in his hand, then at her. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not guilt, not fear, but something quieter. Recognition. The kind that does not speak because it does not need to. She stepped backward. Jean turned, the loaf held tight, and fled through the side lane, down past the smithy into the trees. His breath steamed before him. His heart pounded like a drum of war and mercy. He did not stop until he reached the cottage. When he opened the door, the warmth of 7 surprised faces greeted him. He dropped the loaf on the table. Jean gasped. "Where did you?" He raised a hand. "Eat." She hesitated, but only for a moment. Hunger outranks pride in children and saints alike. The loaf was divided. Small pieces, yet enough for once. Elise smiled in her sleep. And Jean? He did not eat. He sat in silence. His hand was bleeding, and he wrapped it with an old cloth. He stared at the splinters in his palm. This bread will cost more than hunger. He did not yet know how true those words would become. But the bread was eaten, and the line between good man and criminal had been crossed, not in fury, but in love. The morning was quieter than usual. The wind had settled. The frost had hardened into glass across the fields. And yet, there was a tension in the air, not loud but palpable, as though the village itself had drawn a long, slow breath and held it. Jean Valjean woke before the others. He had not truly slept. His hand throbbed from the glass. The cloth had stuck to the wound during the night. When he peeled it back, the blood had dried brown along the edge, like rust on the blade of conscience. The children still slept, their bellies fuller than they had been in weeks. Elise's cough was softer. Jean, too, lay in something like peace. Jean moved quietly. He stood before the hearth, staring at the cold ashes. "One loaf," he thought, "and it feels heavier than all the wood I've carried this winter." A knock, not timid, not neighborly, a knock that expected to be obeyed. Jean turned slowly, eyes narrowing. Another knock, then a voice. "Open, in the name of the mayor." He did not move. The door opened anyway. 3 men entered. One wore the sash of the village guard. The others held cudgels. Behind them, in the snow, stood the baker. It was the girl in the red bonnet who had told. Jean knew it before any words were said. But even so, he could not hate her. She had simply fulfilled her role in a world that taught children to fear the wrong people. "Jean Valjean," the guard said. You are under suspicion of theft. He did not deny it. He looked at Jean. She had risen, pale as linen. The children stirred and sat up, eyes wide, frightened not of violence, but of the unknown. Jean stepped forward. I took the bread. The baker huffed. And smashed my window. The guard nodded. You'll come with us. Jean spoke, her voice cracking. He did it for the children. My children. My husband, he's gone. There's no work. No food. Can't you? It is not a matter of pity, the guard said, not unkindly. It is a matter of law. Jean stepped forward again, desperation rising in her voice. He is a good man. Jean turned to her, gently placing a hand on her arm. It's enough, Jean. The children clung to each other. Elise whimpered. Jean looked down at them. This is what love demands, he thought. That we choose the flame so they may have the light. He took up his coat and stepped past the guards without resistance. As they led him from the house, he heard Jean's voice behind him. Not loud, not weeping, just a single word. Brother. The word struck him harder than the arrest. For he knew that now, in the eyes of the world, he was no longer brother, nor man of labor, nor soul of honest struggle. He was thief, and for the first time in his life, Jean Valjean felt the iron door of society begin to close behind him. The town hall of Faverolles had once been a granary. The smell of old wheat still haunted its beams, though now it was filled not with sacks but silence, the kind that surrounds paperwork and punishment. A long table, scarred by ink and use, stood beneath a cracked window. Behind it sat the magistrate. Jean Valjean stood, hands bound, before the table. The baker sat to one side, fidgeting with a kerchief, his eyes darting between Jean and the magistrate. The guard stood like a shadow behind him. The magistrate, a thin man with spectacles and a voice like boiled linen, cleared his throat. Name, Jean Valjean. Occupation, pruner, woodcutter. Origin, Faverolles. The magistrate made a sound in his throat, something between acknowledgement and indifference. He dipped his quill and scratched at the parchment. You are accused of theft. 1 loaf of bread, taken from the premises of Monsieur Leblanc, baker of this commune. Do you deny it? I do not, Valjean replied. The magistrate looked up, as if surprised by the brevity of guilt. You admit the act, then? Yes. Was it premeditated? Jean hesitated. What is premeditation to a man who has thought of nothing but hunger for weeks? Yes. There was a pause. Do you understand that you have broken the law? I understand that I have broken the window. A murmur from the baker. The magistrate frowned. Theft is theft, whether by need or greed. The code is clear. Jean raised his head. And is mercy also written in your code, monsieur? The magistrate did not answer at once. He dipped his quill again, writing without looking up. Motive is for God. Judgment is for man. Another silence. Then the magistrate addressed the guard. Transport him to Toulon. The words fell like a stone in water. No ripple, only depth. Toulon? Valjean asked, unable to hide the disbelief. For a loaf. Article 383 of the Penal Code, the magistrate said, adjusting his spectacles. 5 years forced labor for theft with evidence of intent. The damage to property, an aggravating circumstance. The baker shifted uncomfortably. I didn't ask for that, he muttered. I just wanted the bread back. The magistrate gave him a thin smile. You brought a charge. The rest belongs to the law. Jean Valjean said nothing, but something in him grew quiet, not from acceptance, but from the first frost of something darker. Not rage, not grief, not yet, only the awareness that the world had no interest in his heart, his reasons, or his history. Only his label. 5 years, he repeated inwardly. For feeding a child. The guard pulled at the rope. Jean did not resist. He walked from the hall, no longer a man with a burden, but a number waiting to be written, a convict waiting to be caged. The journey to Toulon was long, not in miles, but in hours of silence. Jean Valjean rode in a cart with two others, a man with a cleft lip who muttered to himself, and a boy no older than 17 whose eyes were already the color of hopelessness. They said nothing to each other. What was there to say? The towns they passed did not look at them. Even the dogs turned away, as though scenting the disease of shame. Jean kept his head down, not from guilt, but from the weight of knowing that the world had already chosen his place in it. They arrived at dusk. The prison at Toulon loomed like a cliff of stone, its walls blackened by salt and time. It had no spires, no towers, just slabs, chains, and the sound of orders barked in voices stripped of compassion. The sky above it was the color of coal smoke, as if even the sun recoiled from its roof. Inside they were stripped, numbered, shaved. His name was removed. He was now prisoner 24601. This number, he thought, as the iron collar was fastened around his neck, will cling to me longer than my skin. The guard who registered him, a squat man with a wine-stained nose, gave him a glance devoid of interest. "Strong back," he said, scribbling something. "Put him in the chain gang." Jean said nothing. He was handed a uniform, rough, stinking of mildew and sweat. It itched immediately, as if it rejected his body. He was led into a vast courtyard, where other men in identical garb shuffled about like insects in a box. A voice, deep and rasping, came from his left. First time, Jean turned. A broad man with missing teeth grinned at him. "Yes, you'll get used to it," the man said. "Or you won't." The man laughed, then walked off, limping. Jean stood still, feeling the sun vanish from the world, not by cloud, but by design. He slept that night in a cell with 20 others. There was no mattress, no silence, just the rustle of lice and the weight of breath not your own. He did not sleep. In the darkness, someone whispered, "Why are you here?" Jean answered slowly, "Bread." A pause, then a dry laugh. "You'll fit in." No further questions. No more names. The prison was a world where the past did not matter, only the fact of being caught. This place does not punish the deed, Jean thought, staring at the ceiling. It punishes the man. A cold tear formed at the edge of his eye, not from sorrow, not even from rage, but from something worse, the first taste of resignation. And in that moment Jean Valjean, the man, the brother, the worker, felt himself begin to dissolve, into iron, into number, into what the world expected him to become. The days blurred. Work began before dawn and ended long after the body had begged for mercy. The sun was an afterthought. The cold, an old companion. The chains, those one never got used to. Jean Valjean labored in silence. He did not speak, and so he was left alone. Even the guards took little notice of him. He was strong, obedient, and had the look of a man who would not break. Not loudly, at least. He did break, though. Each night a little more. He stopped thinking of Jean, of Elise, of Faverolles. They belonged to another world, one he could no longer afford to remember. Names faded. Dreams rotted. Only the number remained, 24601. One evening, as he stumbled into the corner of the work yard, his leg gave out. He had carried bricks, over 200 in a single shift, without rest or water. The overseer had grunted with approval. Now his body betrayed him. He fell hard on the stones. Blood welled at his temple. The men around him kept walking. In prison, kindness was rarer than bread. To offer it meant suspicion. To accept it meant weakness. But one man stopped. A wiry convict with a face like worn parchment and eyes too young for the lines around them. His name, if it had ever been shared, was not known. But they called him Coche, short for cochon, pig. Not for dirtiness, but for defiance. He had once bitten a guard. The nickname remained. Coche crouched. "You'll freeze there," he said, nudging Jean with a bony knee. Jean did not move. "You want to die?" Coche asked. "No," Jean murmured. "But I wouldn't mind if death insisted." Coche snorted. "You're new enough to wish for dignity. That'll pass." He reached into his coat and drew out a crust of bread, hardened, chewed once, left unfinished. "Eat it," he said. Jean stared. "Why? Because you're too big to carry if you die?" Coche said, then added more softly. "And you remind me of someone." Jean took the crust. He chewed slowly, each bite tasting not of flour but of memory. Coche sat beside him on the stones. "You stole bread, didn't you?" Jean nodded. "Good reason." Jean hesitated. "A girl, a child, sick." Coche looked away. "Better than me. I stole because I was hungry. And stupid." Silence. Then Coche muttered, "Doesn't matter in here. Reasons melt." Jean finished the crust. "Thank you," he said. Coche stood. "Don't thank me. It won't happen again." And he walked away. But Jean sat there, the crust heavy in his gut. Not from the weight of it, but from what it meant. He gave without asking, without gain. That night Jean did not cry. But he did close his eyes, not in dread, but with a sliver of something he had not felt in weeks. Not hope, but its fragile cousin, remembrance. He was not yet lost. Not completely. Winter came to Toulon like a silent siege. No trumpets, no snow, only wind, salt, and cold that crept into the bones and stayed there like debt. Jean Valjean had not spoken in 3 days. Silence had become both armor and habit. The guards called him the ox. The other convicts barely looked at him now, except Coche, who sometimes offered half a nod, as if to say, "You're still breathing. That's enough." On this day, Jean had been set to hauling chain spools. They weighed more than a man and rolled worse. His hands, cracked and raw, bled in the cold. It was there, in the yard, that it happened. A spool, badly fastened, broke free. It rolled down the incline toward a pair of convicts, one old, one lame. They did not see it. The guards shouted, but the men were slow. Jean did not think. He ran. A grunt, a lunge, and the great wheel of iron shuddered against his back. He braced it with his whole weight, knees buckling, feet skidding in the gravel. It stopped. A heartbeat of silence. Then curses, shouts. The guards swarmed. Who loosed it? Who touched the pins? But above it all, one voice. A voice of disbelief. Cut through. Valjean caught it. He could have let it crush them. Jean said nothing. One of the guards approached. The same wine-nosed man who had booked him months before. He looked Valjean up and down, incredulous. "Why did you do it?" Jean shrugged. His breath was ragged, but his voice was even. "They would have died. They are thieves. One's a murderer." "Still men," Jean said. The guard frowned, as if confused by the answer. "You gain nothing from this." Jean looked away. "Not all gains can be weighed." The overseer scowled, unsure whether to commend or condemn. In the end, he spat and walked off. But something strange began that day. The guards watched him more carefully, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. The convicts gave him space, not from fear, but from something quieter. Respect. The word was never spoken, but it hung in the air like a scent. That night, Coche approached him again. "You should have let them die," he said. Jean replied, "Perhaps. They wouldn't have saved you." "I know." Coche studied him for a long moment. Then, almost grudgingly, "You're a fool, Valjean." Jean nodded. "Yes." He looked up at the low, damp ceiling of the barracks. "But I think I would rather be a fool who remembers mercy than a wise man who forgets himself." Coche didn't answer. He simply walked away. Jean lay down on the straw, his back sore, his body shivering. But his soul, if it could still be called that, felt strangely warmer than it had since he'd entered this place. He did not know it yet, but this moment would remain with him longer than the pain, the chain, or even the number burned into his memory. This was the moment Jean Valjean stopped being only a victim of injustice, and began to wonder if he could still choose the man he might yet become. Spring came to Toulon the way a prisoner walks, slow, uncertain, and suspicious of warmth. The wind no longer bit with the same cruelty, but the walls remained unchanged, unmoved by season or sky. Jean Valjean had become, in the eyes of guards and convicts alike, something peculiar. a man who worked harder than necessary, who spoke little but listened, who neither begged nor cursed. One afternoon, the work gang was brought to a halt. A set of iron chains, newly forged, had gone missing. Theft among thieves was not uncommon, but the guards were furious. Punishment was demanded, swift and public. A small man named Drouot, known for his cowardice more than his crimes, had been blamed. A nail file had been found beneath his cot. He wept openly as the guards dragged him forward. "I swear on my mother it wasn't me," Drouot cried. "I didn't take the chains. I didn't even know." "Lies," barked the overseer. The sentence was to be 20 lashes, delivered at once in front of the block. Jean stood among the crowd. His hands, as always, bore the grime of labor. His back, already crisscrossed with old scars, felt the ghost of new ones. He stepped forward. "I know who took the chains," he said. The yard fell still. The guard's face twisted. "Speak." 24601. Jean looked not at the overseer, but at the prisoner weeping on his knees. "I took them," gasped. Even Drouot's sobbing paused. "You?" the guard said, frowning. "Why?" Jean did not blink. "To repair the axle on cart number 4. It was cracked. The chain was needed to reinforce it." "That cart was fixed 2 days ago," the guard muttered. Jean nodded. "With those chains?" The overseer's eyes narrowed. "You confess to theft of state property?" "I do." The silence that followed was different than before. It was not shock but calculation. The guards looked at one another, then at the cart in question. The overseer hesitated. "Why confess now?" Jean said quietly, "Because that man is innocent." And for the first time in months, he felt something unfamiliar on his tongue. Dignity. The lashes were delivered, not to Drouot, to Jean. He bore them without a cry. Each stroke felt like fire. But it was not the pain that mattered, it was the choice. For years, the world had chosen for him. Hunger had chosen theft. The law had chosen punishment. The chain had chosen silence. But now he had chosen. Later that night, Drouot approached him with something in his hand. A strip of cloth, soaked in cool water. "For your back," he whispered. Jean took it wordlessly. Coche, leaning in the shadows, said only, "You're going to get yourself killed being decent." Jean didn't look up. "Better that than live like a ghost." Coche snorted. "Then you're no longer like the rest of us." Jean tied the cloth around his shoulder and lay down. He did not believe he had changed. Not yet, but he had crossed a threshold. One where the soul, though bound by iron, could still choose to kneel beside another. And in that kneeling become human again. Weeks passed. The galleys of Toulon did not change, but Jean Valjean did. Not outwardly. His body still carried stone and steel. His hands still bled, his back still ached. The guards called him the mule. The convicts called him the monk. Half in jest, half in awe. But something within had taken root. An ember lit not by mercy received, but by mercy given. And it would not die. One evening, while returning from the shipyard, he caught sight of the sea. Just a sliver between 2 warehouse roofs. A band of gold on the horizon, trembling in the wind. For the first time in memory he paused to look. There is still beauty, he thought, and I can still see it. That alone felt like a revelation. That night he dreamed of Faverolles. Not the hunger, nor the theft, nor the shame, but of Jean's laughter, the way she clung to his sleeve when frightened, and the smell of bread cooling on a summer window. He awoke with tears drying in the corners of his eyes. The next morning the chaplain came. This was rare. The priest did not often walk the labor wards, but word had spread, quietly, from mouth to ear, like a secret passed between walls. He stopped before Valjean. "You are the one they speak of?" Jean said nothing. "You shielded a man," the priest continued, "and took his punishment." Still no reply. "You repaired a wagon with stolen chain," the priest said, eyes narrowing, "and told the truth of it." Jean raised his head. "I did." The chaplain studied him, then opened a worn leather book. There is a verse, he said gently, in the Gospel of Luke. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. He closed the book. The law punishes the act. But what of the soul that gives? Jean met his gaze. His voice was soft but steady. I am not a good man, Father. I stole. I lied. I hated. And yet, said the priest, you chose to lift a hand when others turned away. Jean said nothing. The priest's eyes twinkled with something like sorrow or hope. Perhaps the law made you a number, but heaven sees otherwise. He left without another word. That evening, Jean Valjean sat alone in the corner of the yard. Coche passed by but did not speak. Drouot offered him a scrap of bread and a nod. He looked at the wall, the same wall he had cursed 1,000 times, and whispered to himself, I am still here, and perhaps that is enough. The chain did not loosen. The number did not fade. But Jean Valjean, prisoner 24601, had begun the work no prison could stop, the slow, painful, sacred labor of becoming a man again. And the world, though blind to it, was quietly changed. And so, before the name Jean Valjean meant hope or mercy, it meant survival. In the silence of chains and shadows, he made a choice. A spark that would one day light the path of redemption. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more untold tales from timeless classics. Your support helps keep these stories alive.